All right, so it's really serious, obviously, what I'm talking about. And I'm talking about race, and I'm going to be talking about people of color. I still have to touch on a few subjects from the last video because there is going to be some overlap. I want to talk about crime in New York City, but it does tie into some of this topic. All right, so let's just start with, I'm going to try and keep it in this correct order that I think is a good way to tell. We're going to keep talking about crime. We're going to keep talking about 1970s New York and the rise of the crime and the crime wave and the urban poverty that I mentioned in the last video that obviously affects a lot. Because people start to notice these things and horrible stereotypes about certain races in certain areas, especially like New York. Harlem, right, becomes famous for just being dangerous and being a place you can't ever go. And if you're white, you're dead there. And that lasts for years and years. Years, okay? My. And then eventually Bill Clinton gets like his offices there, as like to prove like a point of like this, it's okay, you know. People of color liked Bill Clinton back in the day when that was going on, when he was running for president. He appealed to young people, and then he plays the saxophone on Arsenio Hall. That meant something to so many people. That moment in television is a huge moment where Bill Clinton plays the sax. That's why it's in even the Animaniacs theme song. That's how important and powerful it was. That pretty much cinched it. Nixon, as I was talking about in a previous video, showed up on Laugh-In once and said, "Sock it to me." And that was a big deal. There's a reason people say Nixon lost the first time he ran. He ran against Kennedy before. And it was the dawn of television. And there's John F. Kennedy looking gorgeous, handsome, hair and teeth, all of it, right? Marilyn Monroe loves him. Don't tell anyone. And you've got Nixon, sweaty, there, hunched over, nervous, tell him, oh my. That's what people say cost him the election. And again, it's always a small margin, so Nixon does win, but it might have been that margin that made it not happen initially. So there's some history for you. Know your history because it's fascinating. When I was growing up, it was really only PBS for history and maybe a little of the History Channel, and boy, it was boring history. There is so much good history out there now in YouTube videos and things like this that just watching things about the 80s and the 70s, when you watch documentaries about a decade by order, it's excellent. And there is one of those on Netflix. They just go in order. It's very good. So you should, because it's a good way to digest a lot of what you hear about, but you don't quite know why you know something's name, right? Have you heard of a pet rock? Do you know what that is? That was a fad, with a viral thing, much like a fidget spinner. It was the concept of someone was selling a rock, and it's a pet rock, and it was a fad that everyone kind of laughed at, so much so that people forever know about it, right? So you might have heard of pet rocks. You can find out, oh, this was the thing where the pet rock happened, was this time in 19 blah, 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 right? And it's fascinating because some of these things are benchmark moments, more with electronics as we grow up, like when the Nintendo Entertainment System gets invented, or Atari before that. So just dive into history. It's fun. I mean, you can tell I enjoy it, but I wasn't always this way. I hated lots of school. Who doesn't when you're growing up? You got comics to read. But as you grow older, like there is a lot more entertaining versions of history. So dive into it and really soak it all in so that you can fill in the blanks for what it is to be where we are and who we are. So that when people are talking about the history of music, when people are talking about the history of art, when people are talking about the history of comics, oh, that's right, JFK was assassinated in what year? I've said it to you dozens of times. I hope you know it. When was Malcolm X assassinated? When was Martin Luther King Jr. assassinated? So think of that and think if any of those numbers didn't ring true. You've heard them now 3-4 times. Probably important dates to know. So let's talk about all of that stuff as we go on to that with Harlem, as we're saying, the crime rate, it becoming the thing where you see the subway cars getting murdered, getting mugged, the fact that the Marvel Comics is in New York. The people creating these comics are living in these neighborhoods, seeing all this and living through it. So of course, writing their personal experiences. You always put some of yourself into things. We write from experience, right? And that, obviously imagination, but you get what I mean. Imagination helps, but we write from our experiences and can write, I think is the word. You can put yourself into a character. You can put your experience or something similar into your story. And that's what I mean by those messages there. So that crime really happens, and it really affects a lot of people. It starts the concept of vigilante superheroes. If these people, we want justice, right? How many times did Batman catch the Joker? Continuity starts to catch up with these characters as people start asking these questions. What, did he bust out of Arkham Asylum again? And you do see it becomes a part of the story that they always do escape, which makes Batman look ridiculous, right? We even live in a society where people get the electric chair. But in the superhero world, there's like this unfortunate caveat or something. It's like, oh, you were captured by a superhero. We can't try you as this same thing. And they plead insanity, and Arkham Asylum happens. So there's different versions of that. There's super prisons. There's all this stuff. But that idea really starts to, come to play as the violence starts to affect the creators, so the creators start to affect the comic books. And the rise of the anti-hero starts to occur, and vigilantes, right? So that happens. So it's a good time to talk about, so the Punisher, a big deal when he shows up. We all know the Punisher. Because people just asking this question, why doesn't he just put him to bed? Like, this person's a monster. Like, oh, there's a rapist. I'll just shoot him so he doesn't do it again. And the other heroes are like, you can't do that. Daredevil's like, you can't do that. Daredevil being very religious to this day. All right, you can't just murder people. This is the difference. Captain America's like, you can't just murder people, right? Even though he was a soldier. Trying to not just murder people is a good value to live by, right? People can change. You try to live by that. People make mistakes. You try to live by that. That's why, again, just like in wrestling, as I say before, comics and wrestling are the rare stories where you see the bad guys turn good and then the good guys turn bad and then back and forth again, right? Like it does often, it happens where the bad guy will just he'll go, oh, right? Or a hero will fall, but then that's kind of it. That's what it is. They don't come back and rebound, come back and rebound. That's some of what happens is perspectives change throughout time. Magneto, an easy villain back in the day, but then it's like, oh, he was in the Holocaust. Oh, this has happened to him before because he's Jewish. He's seen the Nazis. He was there. He knows it's not a fable, and it's what murdered his family. So he has a right to not trust, you should register as a mutant. Put yourself on this list. The government is okay. We'll protect you. No, you will not, right? Privacy is always a big issue in this country up until pretty recently. Pretty recently, people start to not care. So we've got Punisher. Punisher also a Vietnam veteran. So remember that thing I said before about vets being all over the streets, homeless vets. We didn't take care of these veterans from Vietnam, as that takes place from I had it here from 60. What is it? Vietnam starts in 73. Okay, so 1973. And this is what starts anti-war sentiment. Again, that liberalism, the concept of being anti-war. It's like, what are we doing there? It was easy back in the day, right? Nazis evil, punch in the face, done. Okay? World wars were a little easier because villains were kind of laid out. They were here to brutally murder you. Vietnam is us having, we have political, reasons and intentions and interests in the area and wanting certain things to happen in other parts. So we're going to protect one side as the other side's they're in their own civil war. So it's interesting. And again, I'm not going to tell you what Vietnam's about. Go look up what Vietnam's about, right? Go watch a nice 15-minute video about Vietnam from an expert because it's important. Frank Castle is sitting there in the park with his family. He's returned from war, right? And his family is gunned down in front of his own eyes and caught in the crossfire of New York City crime in a drive-by between two gangs and gangsters and stuff, mobsters probably, right? And his family gets shot as he is, and he's not there. He's out of the way, or he probably reacts, or whatever happens, or he's late and he just sees it in time. Think of it like the opening scene of Avengers Endgame where Hawkeye just goes to pick up that thing and then his family's gone. Right? And that's a little just more mystifying. And it screws him up. And he becomes Ronin. Goes on a murdering spree. Doesn't he? That's what happens. That's important. Let's challenge that now for a moment. Because we're in New York. It's setting something. Then I'm going to go back to the race because Harlem I'm mentioning, I'm getting right to Luke Cage. You know it's coming. Okay? But as I just said all that stuff, what I just described with these heroes and then what they do, Spider-Man is tested, as is the reader and everyone, when in one of the most shocking things that happens in Spider-Man 121, in Amazing Spider-Man 121, in June of 1971, his girlfriend, his longtime girlfriend of Gwen Stacy, dies. And it is tragic. It is tragic. You've all had a fictional character that you love die, okay? This does not happen back then all that often, especially in comics. All right, it becomes a trope that characters don't die in comics. All right, and you get entire other universes where, oh, that character lived and someone else died now, so she's over here now. Like, that is, we're far away from that. Okay, death is death, and death rarely happens. The Winter Soldier, who used to be Bucky, Captain America's little sidekick, he used to be the one. Oh, death in comics is never permanent, except for Bucky, and then Bucky comes back. They broke the rule, they finally did it, but it worked. Winter Soldier becomes very popular. But the night Gwen Stacy died, and that is the name of the title. That's the name of it. The night Gwen Stacy dies, I think, or it's the night Gwen Stacy died. It is just me rewatching one of these videos and watching people talk about it in the way that I challenged you to talk about something memorable. A lot of you told me some happy stories, which I guess, it was what it was. Talking about those days that we remember, talking about the assassinations, the moon landing, things like that, where it's stuck in your head forever and you are there at this pinnacle moment. That happened to a lot of these comic fans at the time because, as one of them says, it's like, Gwen Stacy was my girlfriend. Like, that's what I'm doing. Like, I can't believe it. And it was real and so well done, so well written and crafted. Because it's not a 10-part story, because it's his life. Like, everything about this is leading up to this, and then this happens and things go on. She's gone. So it's not about a story. That's what comics and wrestling, again, are. They're the continuing endless story. Some of them are, and then some of them we're going to restart you because we need a new set of fans, new young kids to grow up with comics. Reset again. We need a new set of fans to grow up with comics. That is what occurs here. There's no concept of revamping. The idea that this happens in his life is what you see, what you feel. That one story is titled that. I'm not sure how many parts they were doing that specific story, but I know that the artists were starting to do the thing that they start to drop Norman Osborn in the background of parties, in the background, and then he becomes a talking character. Norman Osborn is seen as he's introduced to Peter Parker's friend Harry Osborn. This is his dad, and it's shocking when that's the Green Goblin and that's all the stuff that happens, and then that he actually murders Spider-Man's girlfriend because he finds out who Spider-Man is, and that happens where oh my goodness, and it happened. And the saddest thing is that Spider-Man, this is where I get choked up. Spider-Man thinks he saved her because he just does it as it always does, right? But as Gwen Stacy's falling, because he launches her off the thing, you've seen this version in a few movies too. Save this or save that, whatever. He goes to get Gwen Stacy, gets her, saves her, throws webbing, grabs her, it snags her by the ankle. But as she lands, you see it, as she lands and it catches, there's a little sound effect. So think of your fonts, think of these things, think of how important a little snap is. And Spider-Man's pulling her up, being like, well, you know me, save the day again, blah, blah, just as normal as it is for your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. And then he realizes that she died, and he's responsible. Even worse, he's responsible for her father's death in a way, Captain Stacy, sorry. And it is a pinnacle moment to do that. You all know, again, when characters that can die, because we go through another long period where that doesn't really happen. It doesn't. Even when Superman does do it, everyone knows it's not going to last. But when that happened in those Games of Thrones, right, it really bothered some of you. It really does bother you. When they kill someone in these Star Wars, it really gets you. That's what it is. It really set the tone for what comics are going to be now, because it's certainly not kid stuff, And let's get back to race relations there. And that's going to bring us back to New York and Harlem and Luke Cage, which here's another example of stuff. He's the hero for hire. So he is the superhero that's not there to do, don't worry about me. I just do it because I'm Superman, I'm Wonder Woman, I'm a rich billionaire. Don't worry about me. I don't need a thing. Peter Parker, no, I can't. I just do this, right? Doesn't try to use it for personal gain, because the time he tried to do it, it ruined his whole life. So Luke Cage is the hero for hire. He's got business cards, right? He's there to protect his neighborhood, his streets. No one's paying attention here. I'm going to have to do something about it. Luke Cage, he's got unbreakable skin, is what Luke Cage is. So he's just like nigh invulnerable, right? And like that means super strong. And that's pretty much all you need to be, right? Basically bulletproof and super strong, you're going to get a lot done. Not to mention we are in the super buff age of heroes. So Luke Cage is there to specifically help Harlem and help the area. Marvel had long ago, much like I was saying about Marvel being a bit more progressive, and Stan Lee always being progressive, again, with the X-Men and their whole mission, they're very similar to anyone, people of color, trying to protect a world that hates and fears them. That's what it is, right? And it's just these race issues snuck in there with, they are, remember I was wondering if the X-Men, because they're mutants, is it race or species? They are the next evolution of the human species. So it's an evolutionary step. That's what they are. They have mutated to the next level. So in the future, it's supposed to be everyone is that excellence, right? That everyone is this thing. So it's evolution for them. But getting back to those stories and the concept of the X-Men and Stan Lee always being aware of this, and he just goes like, oh, everyone should be involved. And it's because he lived in New York. And it's because he was one of the downtrodden and he gets it. He's walked a mile in these shoes. And that's a lot of people's problems today, right? And that is a lot of the hate that you see. I'm not getting on it. A lot of the hate you see is because those people don't even have a friend that's a person of color, okay? Let alone specifically a black friend. So that's why that Black Lives Matter is bothering them so much, and it's just absurd, right? And it's just backed by hate. Go ask those people. Oh, like, well, what do your black friends think? They don't have any black friends, okay? You see it with homosexuality at certain points. It gets accepted from people because they start to have to know. Well, you have to deal with me. I'm your gay son. And then you see some people cast them out, and some people then say, well, I guess I got to take you in. And they learn that it doesn't make you an abomination or a monster or anything like that, right? But people have to learn this because religion is some of it, and fear, that's a thing. But you can't just come out and make people accept you with race. It's not hidden away. It's not in the closet. It's not something that you try to not let people know in this time for the fear of someone's just going to kill you. People of color have to deal with this, right? And I'm trying to really emphasize people of color, because sometimes I'll say this stuff, and one of my best friends is Puerto Rican, and if I'm saying like a black woman, she's like, well, all people of color. I'm like, well, yeah, you're right. Like, she gets a lot of stuff, right? Because she's Puerto Rican. So a lot of it is that. And again, I have examples of all the Asian stereotypes in the previous videos, horrifying. And even at this time, I don't know if I mentioned it because I wasn't talking about Green Lantern. Green Lantern hero had a sidekick named Pie Face. They called him that. I believe I did talk about that. And I think it's in this era where he might stand up to him. They tell the story where Pie Face stands up to him for calling him that. Okay? So that's a lot of, again, the crime, Luke Cage being invented and it being pinnacle, right? Another one that we all know, and now let's talk about this because it's it's obviously so important, all right, is the Black Panther. So I was going to talk about Luke Cage and the crime video, right? And talk about that and why he's there in Harlem and that whole area, like I was talking about, right? And I wanted to use Wakanda, and I wanted to use the Black Panther, just more about use that for race relations conversations. Because here's why. They are the society of we never got found by white people. We stayed hidden on this area, and we developed as a society, and we have technological advances, right? That is something. We have our heritage and we have our history, and it's rich, and we do not want the outside world to find us. Again, hidden away, sad. Isn't it sad? Again, much like closeting it away, keeping it hidden, because someone's going to take it and take it by force, right? Talk about what a symbol the Black Panther is. Just that hero with that origin that goes to rule, his people as he has to. And in that movie, the way you see it, where it's like revealed that this exists, it's fascinating. It's a fascinating land and a fascinating world. And just the concept alone. Has anyone tackled a concept as interesting as that, right? What if we never this, right? It's a pretty big what if, isn't it? And Wakanda talks about it, and the Black Panther talks about it. As you all know, everything with the Black Panther recently, I'm going to use it as an example. And I've been waiting. I was going to make this in a separate video, but here we are speaking about it. The Black Panther, specifically the movie, and specifically Chadwick Boseman, what happened when he passed away. We're going to talk about that for a second. It was very sad. To wake up to that news was very sad and startling. All right? To see photos of kids using their action figures like they are at the funeral for the Black Panther. Oh my goodness. Because we have seen actors, athletes, and a lot of important people die this year. And some people that were regular people, but then became some of the most important people, die this year. Okay? And then Chadwick Boseman died. And the world really grieved in a way, an outpouring so much bigger than some of these real people, because he was the Black Panther. And that's what it like that as we go to this new media, when you become one of these Marvel Cinematic characters, which is why all these actors want it, because it's, oh, that's my retirement plan. You're around forever. That's what it is, isn't it? These characters aren't you? They might CG you into stuff at this point, won't they? That's what it means to sign up to be a Marvel hero. The fact they go to hospitals, they show up in costumes. That's in the book. That you got to do this. You got to go to Comic Cons. You are carrying the mantle of what this character represents, and these characters represent the very best of the best, the purest of us all, the most driven by behaving and being the right way. And I don't mean behaving, I mean like just Captain America's ideals of just equality and treating everyone with respect, and the sexes are equal, and freedom for all, and not oppression, and not fascism, and not abuse. And it's buried in but they still punch people, but they are often very much punching villains, people that are trying to wipe out civilization, take over the world, that grand idea, a murderer, a specific villain. And they do have problems, but they don't have moral problems that much. You get your anti-heroes later, and that does solve some of the problems for some people. Yeah, Punisher does that, and that makes sense. There's plenty of gangsters to shoot. But he played Chadwick Boseman played Jackie Robinson, right? He played other important black figures from history. If he did not play the Black Panther, this outpouring would not have been as important, or not important, as big, right? And I say big because the thing that really showed this to me is the fact that the tweet about his death became the most retweeted tweet in history, besting Barack Obama's, which is astonishing. The death of what people feel is the Black Panther and what Wakanda Forever means to a culture where they lost a hero like they lost Kobe Bryant, and you saw how important it is, even because it's not fiction, is it? Because the reality's blurred, is it? Black Panther's still in the comics, and we still have the Black Panther the way it was created, but we don't, right? And it's interesting, right? And people don't want him to be recast. And there is a natural evolution where Suri takes it, and maybe they do that because they can do the Black Panther part. They can do that CG. That is CG. He doesn't have to show his face, and something bad happens. It just shows. It shows what superheroes mean, because in this work, I must have brought up in other videos, I talk about my defense of this artwork and the genre and everything. And it is so much about people just look at it as it's low, and always have. But even within our industry and our art form of comic creators, people look at superhero comics as low, specifically. And people have superhero fatigue from the films and from the culture of superheroes that we're really in, that you have no idea. I had to mail away for a Spider-Man shirt when I was growing up, but they were nowhere. Nothing existed. And then you start to see what licensing becomes in the 80s and then into the 90s, right? It's amazing to me to think that and be reminded of that. Superheroes are important to people. They really do represent something. They are, in a way, a new religion. That's what some people say. People worship these pop culture icons, whatever their pop culture icon is, okay? But these superheroes that do their specific role as a pop culture icon is like, I don't lie, and I don't steal, and I don't cheat. Like, their rules are being the purest. People might worship a rock star celebrity, but that has nothing to do with it, because their morals, it's usually their lifestyle. It's the partying, it's the rock star stuff. It's that. I was so moved, and I couldn't believe it. And that's why I love what I'm doing. And I couldn't believe that I get to start this class because I love superheroes. And superheroes are not a dirty word the way in comics, the way comics are not a dirty word in art. All right. And that to me is important. So let's talk about one of the most important stories. And it is we go back to the Green Arrow and Green Lantern. I talked about them in the last one as they're on their road trip to discover America, right? And that starts with a man, and we're going to talk about this. Why I always talk about the shirt somewhere, right? So Sesame Street started in 1969. New York integration, starting to show multiple races, multiple people of color, right, on TV, and kids and adults all in the neighborhood getting together, right, on this street, like in the barrio of New York in a way. Like it's amazing, right? That's what that was. Phenomenal, made by the people who are living that, just walking down the street doing that. Okay, this character is the Silver Surfer, right? Look at that silver man. It is Green Lantern, Green Arrow, where Green Lantern is confronted by a man on the street, an old black man. And he tears into Green Lantern saying, this. So you see that he might not be a purple skin or a blue skin. He's a silver skin, right? And he's in space. That's who Green Lantern's been thinking about for a while. How come? How come he never did something for the black skins, as this man says? Okay? And Green Lantern is just like taken aback, and he's like, "You're right." Like, oh my gosh, you're right. What am I like? It's interesting, and is shocked at this allegation. And Green Arrows are the ones like, "You're wrong," but like look at you and points this out to him. He's like, so he's going, "You're right," to this man and to Green Arrow. Like, you're right. Like he's trying to burst his bubble because Green Lantern is kind of represents this like Leave It to Beaver era at this point, and he's going to be like, no, you have to wake up. Green Arrow's talking about the poor people, the racism, the urban poverty. He's talking about all of it, and he hates it all so much. Like I said, he hates it, and he's a great character for that. It's so funny for what he says and what he does, like calling where he's like, "You're a fascist," for like anything, right? It's great. Um, and and this is just such a big, powerful moment in comics, right? Because that page in history and that story and this arc of a comic is so important. And it's Neil Adams and Denny O'Neil, and that's important because one of them goes on to do one of the worst things, and that's in the next video. So I'll talk about that in the next video. But it just is something as Green Lantern, Green Arrow discuss race by comparing it to purple skins and blue skins at first, because isn't that easy, right? But to actually really start to talk about all this stuff in comic books and to try to get people to read it, to try to get people to understand because they don't have a black friend, that is the point of stories, and that's the point of this experience. Because when you meet those people that are not friends with a person of color, that do not have a gay friend in their life, or do not have whatever it is, they are short-sighted and make assumptions again about the flavor of everything. If you're too afraid to, just taste this thing, how are you going to let something that you think, if I'm friends with you, I'll be cast to hell. If you're my kid, you'll be cast to hell because of who you are, right? Oh, I've heard this about your race. I've heard this about you. I see it on the news all the time. Really associating crime in New York with African Americans, okay? Like really, really doing it. And you can see the percentages are ringing true to this very day, okay? It is hard to look at, isn't it? That's what it is. And that's what America needs to do these days. Take a hard, long look, right, at itself, because we've been all living in a little bit of a bubble. Because we've all been creating this virtual universe this Dick Van Dyke Leave It to Beaver that we're all pretending it is on the internet, and there is all these other this bubbling under the surface where they're getting together too, and they found a bunch of like-minded people too, and it's scary, but it's not new. So that's why, again, you need to make art. You need to make art about it. You need to always address this. And when you are in times that are memorable, that people will never forget where they were when this was happening, and it's a weird one with some of this stuff. You're gonna see in 20 years, like, wow, because who knows? But it's that it might just go through the same cycle again, because that's what it's been. If you don't remember your past, you are doomed to repeat it, right? America does this a lot. But my friend tells me this, and I'll leave it at this, right? Because have I touched on everything I want to touch on? No. Because what does DC Comics do? I will save it for the next video because this video is long. DC Comics does something about race, and it's also about women. So we'll deal with that in the next one because feminism is the next video. All right, so let me just make sure I didn't do anything. I talked about that. Crime, real stereotypes, New York. Comics change with the times. Comics are more grounded. Gwen Stacy. Up. What happens when Spider-Man is put to the ultimate test? Let me conclude with that too. He beats the Green Goblin within an inch of his life, and then he says no. Important. You will always be pushed to your very limits in life at certain points. Do not give up on your character or who you are. Do not sell yourself out. All right, and that's the lesson. You don't want to fall victim to that, to compromising who you are, even in the worst circumstances, no matter what they are. Okay, just stand proud and stay strong with your identity, because some people will always come after you forever, and you got to be ready to just punch a Nazi in the face. Sometimes figuratively, you know what I mean. So. Integration time, Punisher, hero, this and that, not killing people. Vietnam, Watergate, not trusting the government. We talked about that. I mentioned Nomad. I talked about that. We're going to get into... I barely got into the 80s. I really barely got into the 80s. And the fact that we start to get into... the 80s, the beginning of the 80s really does start to impact the next era. Because the next era starts in 86. All right, and I'm going to start with that. But there's a couple things that happen to kind of lead to the attitudes at that time. One of them in 1981, I just told you again, Sesame Street invented in 69, so a generation of kids starting being raised on that, seeing equality, not being afraid of people and culture. MTV gets invented in 1981, so now the teenager takes on a whole new meaning, freedom of expression, that sort of thing, the rock star, all that. MTV changes the generation. It is the MTV generation. It's a huge deal. Another great thing that happened in 1976 was Superman and Spider-Man had their first crossover. It was the first crossover in comics history. Later on, Batman meets the Incredible Hulk, which is an odd one. But I guess because Bruce Banner is like a scientist, Batman's kind of a scientist detective. So that's also some fun moments and fun things there that happen that are more comic related. And again, Cold War's raging on. We're going to talk about that because again, that comes to an abrupt halt, which also changes the comics world. And let's talk about feminism, and we're going to start with the ever-present, non-trouble-causing Lois Lane. She never causes a problem.